What's up, y'all? Marcus Frazier from Teachable Tuesday. It's going to motivate you, encourage you, and inspire you to be a better you. Thank you for joining me today. Greatly appreciate it. If you could, hit the like button, subscribe button, and notification button, so that way you can stay up to date with all of my future Teachable Tuesdays content. And today, we're going to talk about something very interesting. We're back at it again with the hip-hop videos. I told you guys I'm going to give you 50 because it's the 50th year of hip-hop's birth. I won't be doing the hip-hop videos necessarily every single day, but I'm still on the road to give you guys 50. I'm going to post a playlist below, just in case you missed any beforehand. I know it's been a little minute since I've done some of these. And yeah, we should be on our way to 50 shortly. But today, we're going to talk about the East Coast, West Coast beef. And for those of you who may not be familiar, and I'm going to tell you in a second why I'm doing this. So in the 90s, the East Coast and West Coast had a supposed beef. And the beef essentially started really between Pac and Biggie. So let me give you a little backstory for my new school hip-hop fans that might not know much about this. My old school hip-hop fans, you already know what time it is. Feel free to correct me in the comments if I get any information wrong or if there's any information I need to add. I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible. I could go into full detail, but there's many documentaries that you can find on YouTube if you want to do your own research to kind of fill in the gaps. I'm kind of just going to give you the basis of everything, right? So, Big and Tupac, we got to start there. So, Big, born in New York, Bed-Stuy to be more specific. Pac was originally born and raised in Baltimore. New York as well. He ended up moving to Baltimore at a young age. And then eventually, as his stardom grew in the 90s, he ended up moving to LA. So pretty much claimed the West Coast at that point, right? So how did this even happen? Well, first of all, we got to get to the part where Big and Pac used to be really good friends. When Big was coming up, Pac would actually bring Big on his shows, and Big would open up for Pac, and they became like really mad cool. They instantly clicked, and what ended up happening was Pac was in New York, and he was recording, and when he pretty much left the recording studio, was on the elevator, he ended up getting shot. He got shot. I think it was 5 times he got shot. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But basically, he ended up going in the hospital as a result. He was in the hospital for quite some time, recovering. And all he remembers is him being in New York and being pretty much, within the area of the studio where Diddy was working at, right? So, of course, Diddy, or Puff Daddy back in the day, or P. Diddy, was associated with Biggie and Bad Boy Records because that was Biggie was P. Diddy's artist. So, his main artist, I would argue, at the time being. So, Pac had thought in his mind that, it must have been Biggie that was the one that set me up, or Biggie and Diddy, right? So, of course, Pac gets out the hospital. He's obviously pretty upset, and he goes on this rampage. And basically, he starts attacking Biggie lyrically, like through songs, calling him out, and this and that. And there's so many other things that went into it. I'm not going to get into full detail. Like I said, you read up on the documentaries, watch the documentaries, all that good stuff. I said read up. Watch the documentaries and all that good stuff. And there's a lot of information. But the whole point that I'm making is it was kind of a beef going on. It wasn't really like a full-fledged beef because at first Biggie really wasn't saying nothing. In fact, Biggie didn't understand why Pop was even dissing him, because Big was like, man, I ain't do this. I had nothing to do with this, you know what I'm saying? But, the whole guilty by association aspect, right? So basically, Big eventually started sending subliminal messages towards Pac, and there was, a beef. Apparently, Diddy had told Big not to say nothing. I mean, we don't know if that's actually true or not, but yeah, there was exchanges back and forth, and unfortunately, September of 1996, Pac was killed in Las Vegas, coming from the Mike Tyson fight. Now, people didn't say that it was Big who did it or East Coast or anything like that. To this day, supposedly, they don't know who did it, although I'm convinced they really do know who did it. And then unfortunately, 6 months later, Big died. He was shot in L.A. So the unfortunate untimely demise of two rising stars that hadn't even reached their peak yet. You know what I'm saying? They were nowhere near close to their peak. And I would argue stars and hip hop artists that weren't planning on being involved with at least rap music too much longer. If you read into what Pac and Biggie were saying in their interviews before they died, neither one of them had any plans to continue to rap for too much longer. They wanted to own their own record label. They wanted to get more into starring in movies. They wanted to get more into the business side of things. You know what I'm saying? They wanted to get away from the artistry aspect. So, it's very interesting to imagine what things would have been like had they stayed alive, or even just stayed alive a little bit longer, to see how they would have developed. I'm a firm believer that they would have squashed the beef after some time. I really think they would have reconciled, and I think we would have, gotten some dope music, from them, and just some dope collaborations. Because Pac, if you remember in his interviews, for my old school hip hop fans, he wanted to build Death Row East. And Pac even said it himself, and this kind of brings me to the point of the quote-unquote East Coast, West Coast beef. There was really no East Coast, West Coast beef. It was something that was fueled by the industry, you know what I'm saying, to keep this going and to keep this engaged for their own specific purposes. Pac even said it himself, ain't no beef with the East Coast. We trying to feed artists and put them on the East Coast, just like we were put on. So now we trying to spread love, and whoever want to come on board, we just pretty much spreading out. And if you don't know, Death Row Records was a force to be reckoned with at one point in time. Yes, after Pac died, eventually everything just kind of went downhill from there. But at one point in time, Death Row was on one. I mean, they were competing with Death Row was a major label itself, but they were competing with other major labels. You know what I'm saying? So this was a really, really big deal for Pac to say, hey, we want to create Death Row East. Because Death Row was founded on the West Coast. Let's go ahead and expand, which I think would have been very, very interesting, to say the least. I think this was more of a beef, of, if you want to label it, maybe you could say Bad Boy Records versus Death Row Records, if that even. Because there were people on Bad Boy Records that weren't even really beefing with, anybody on Death Row Records. I mean, Faith Evans, she didn't have no negative say about it. Craig Mack, who was also popular at the time, he didn't really have much of a say towards, anybody. I mean, it was just very interesting, to say the least. Yes, there were certain East Coast artists that provoked Pac, and Pac provoked certain East Coast artists. But it really wasn't no East Coast, West Coast beef. You could definitely say there was a beef between Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur. Absolutely. But to say that there was an East Coast, West Coast beef would be invalid. There's a lot more to it than a lot of people realize. And it's just sad that this, led to two men who were very young. You got to think, Pac was 25 when he died. Big was 24. You feel me? Like, I'm 32. So I'm sitting here thinking to myself, like, God darn, these cats weren't even mature enough. I think about me when I was a 24-year-old and I was a 25-year-old, and I still had a lot of immature ways. I still had a lot of ways that I had to break out of to become a more mature man. So these cats weren't even really fully mature yet. You know what I'm saying? You give or take another 3 or 4 years beyond the time they died, if they were still alive, how much they would have matured. You know what I'm saying? And I would like to think, if there was a such thing as multiverse theory, that some people do believe in, by the way, that there is a timeline where they are actually alive and they're older and they're reminiscing about how dumb the beef was. Because that's what happens with a lot of these rap artists. They beef for years and they end up squashing it. I mean, you got the few exceptions like 50 and Ja Rule, but at this point, I just think they're being petty towards each other. But, like Nas and Jay-Z, they squashed their beef, LL Cool J, he squashed a couple beefs with people. You know what I'm saying? It's just, you mature, you realize there's more to life than just beefing over something that was stupid when you were at an immature level, because you realize what you were back then is not who you are now. I even think to myself, Marcus at 21 years old is a lot different than Marcus at 32 years old. Marcus at 31 years old was a lot different than Marcus when he was 17. You know what I'm saying? You learn more, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, bottom line, there was no East Coast, West Coast beef. There was a Big and Pac beef, and it's just quite sad that it had to end the way that it ended. Again, there's way more details if you want to know about the beef as far as the exchanges, what took place, the records, so on and so forth, the implications. Like I said, I encourage you to do your research for my new school hip hop fans, for my younger individuals who watch the channel that might know about Biggie and Tupac, but might not know the intricacies of their friendship and how things kind of went downhill after Pac got shot in New York, and the legacies that they left behind, and even their entourage and what they had to say about matters. All right. So again, this is Marcus Frazier from Teachable Tuesday, here to motivate you, encourage you, and inspire you to be a better you. Thank you for joining me today. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. Hope you enjoy yourselves. As always, stay safe. God bless.